now we want to begin to look at where the agreements are in your experience. We have from the beginning the 5 relationships at the different levels of vibrancy that you've experienced. And then we looked at the 3 levels of reality. And then we started to say, okay, those are agreements that we can choose. Now we want to look at what are the big questions that people who've been thinking about choice and agreements for a long time, what have they seen? We're going to go back and see that over the last couple hundred years, there's been a framing that has come out and emerged of how to think about these big questions that people have asked for a very long time. In essence, the 4 questions are, how much is there when we look out into the world of things that we see? Who decides how to allocate what there is? What criteria are they going to use to decide how to distribute or allocate those things that we have? And how are we going to organize that whole piece? Now, to help us understand how economics has approached this, we're going to look at 4 big questions. We're going to see that there is basically a framework that says, what are we looking for? The inputs. That we transform into something that is an output for somebody else. And now we're going to see how do we organize the whole thing. Now, in economics, we've been working on these principles for quite a while, for a couple hundred years, at least in the current way that it looks. So what we're going to see is that when we look at the question of inputs, we look at these as the factors of production. Or we also call these resources. These factors of production today are known as land, labor, and capital. The transformation of these inputs, or these factors of production, is also known in economics as the organization. And the outputs are the value. The organizing process for all of this, that might be a little confusing with organization and organize, but how we think about this whole thing in economics is called the allocation mechanism. So what we want to see briefly is what are these pieces and how have they been developed? There are very different schools of thought that have been developed to think about what are the factors that we use to produce something of value for others. How are we going to organize the transformation of those inputs into outputs that somebody else values? And that there's a whole system for thinking about how to best allocate resources using this process. This resources or factors of production way of looking at the world is looking at what is the most efficient way of understanding what are the resources that are coming in. So what are resources and how do we most efficiently bring them in? Another theory is around value. What is it that we're providing to whom that's of value? What is value? Is it value because we don't have any? Is it value because it provides happiness to us? So what is it that we value and how do we exchange that value? So that when I'm taking something and doing something to it that's of more value to you, what is that value for you? And the organization question is really this efficiency question of how do I transform some basic inputs of land or labor or capital into something that you value more than the inputs, and that's how I organize myself to do that. And again, the allocation mechanism process is looking at what resources do we value in what ways, what is of value, what are we trying to achieve, and what is the best way to organize resources on that pathway. What we want to emphasize here at the moment is that in economics, these are 4 very different schools of thought. And a lot of richness has been brought into thinking about these schools of thought over time. What are resources? What are different in the theories around them and their dynamics? What is the theory of organization, the most efficient ways that we've learned to organize people to work with resources to provide value? What are the incentives, the structures, the processes? What is value, and how do you exchange value, and how do you distribute value? A whole series of insights into what is value and the theory of value, and theories of allocation mechanisms, which study a comparative economist study. So, 4 different schools of thought that come together to transform inputs into outputs of value to somebody in the most efficient way. These are the 4 big questions of economics.